This statue of Khafra was recovered in the Temple of Khafra in the Giza Valley. It's dated to about 2500 BCE. It's made of a stone that is related to diorite, and it's imported from Nubia. This stone has a really interesting reaction when it hits sunlight. So when the sunlight hits it, it glows a deep blue. And blue, of course, is the color of Horus. So this would be an extra special aspect of the stone, and perfect for depicting a pharaoh, because of course the pharaoh and the Horus are one in life. Normally statues were going to be painted, but because of this quality of the stone, we think that this one was not painted, and they would have just let the natural effect take place. So here we have Khafra, and he sits on a lion throne. And the lion is a symbol of regal authority. So I think maybe you can see a little bit better here that lion. So here's the lion's head. There would have been one over here too, it's highly damaged. His paws, and here's the rest of his body. So he sits on this lion throne. Beneath the seat of the throne is papyrus and lotus. So they're over here. And they symbolize the king's power over Upper and Lower Egypt. Behind the pharaoh's head, sort of kind of protectively enfolding the pharaoh's head, is Horus in his falcon aspect, and he perches on the back of the throne. Khafra wears a traditional royal costume, that short pleated skirt, the linen headdress with the cobra symbol of Ra on it. You can see that a little bit better here. You can see that cobra symbol of Ra here. He wears a false beard, and this is a typical beard worn by pharaohs, and is a symbol of royalty. He is depicted as very fit, youthful. He is idealized. This is probably not exactly what he would have looked like in real life, but this is the best airbrushed version of Khafra. So it probably did kind of look like a portrait of him, but modified to be a little bit prettier than he actually was. And also, it didn't matter what time of his life this was produced, he would always be depicted as this youthful, athletic, idealized male. So in this image, he's meant to convey a strong sense of dignity. He is very calm. You can see he's expressionless. He's looking out at us. But of course, he would be looking over our heads. He wouldn't actually be making eye contact with us, because we would be put on a lower plane than he is, because he's the pharaoh and we are just lowly viewers. He also conveys permanence. It's interesting because this is sculpture in the round, but it's almost not, because it's connected to this throne in such a way that it looks like a high relief sculpture. This throne really gives him a sense of solidness. Then if he was just standing by himself, he really wouldn't have that. So the throne makes him heavier, makes him seem more unwavering and permanent. His body is compactly pressed, kind of confined to the limits of the throne. His arms are pressed tight to his body, and his body is connected to that massive block of the throne in the back. And again, it's to convey this lasting presence. Now, if you look closely at his hand right here, I think maybe you can see it maybe a little bit better there, perhaps even better right here. He's actually clutching something in his hand. He is holding a cloth. Maybe you can see the tip of it sticking out here, and then it goes down like this. This cloth is closed within his hands, and we have unequal length coming out of each hand. So just kind of the tip comes out of this part, and then this part is actually fairly long. These unequal lengths represents life. So the short end represents mortal life, and the long end represents immortality, or the afterlife. So one of the reasons they place such an importance on burial in the afterlife is because that's going to be a really long time. Your life here on earth is very short, but your life afterwards, of course, is eternity. So it's very long. So that represents that. Great stereotypical pleated skirt, headdress, cobra, false beard, idealized male. This is an image of Menkaure and his queen, perhaps his main queen. We're not really sure. Remember, they actually have they take multiple wives. This is from around 2500 BCE. It was found in Menenkaure's Valley Temple in Giza. He is Khafra's son, Menankari's Khafra's son, and this is one of Menankari's queens. They did take multiple wives. Often they would marry a sister to keep the bloodline pure, but they would also have several other wives and children from both their main wife and all their other wives. This is a great example of a double portrait. It really promotes the same themes of the last statue we looked at, dignity, calm, and permanence, but it has this kind of nice intimacy. Even though they seem very stark and impersonal and, of course, unwavering, they're tied together by the queen's embrace. So Menankari stands up rigidly, straight, and his queen puts her arm around him and touches his arm with her other hand. This, of course, shows the relationship, the intimate relationship between husband and wife, but also connects her to his power. Menankari is depicted in the standard Egyptian pharaoh way. He's athletic, he's youthful, he's in the prime of life, he is nude to his waist, and he is wearing a royal kilt and a headdress. Both figures are standing with one foot in front of the other, which is traditional whenever a pharaoh is standing. The queen wears a sheer garment that adheres to the curves of her body, so it almost looks like she's naked, but if you look closely, you can see the hem of her skirt and some of the other sort of qualities, like in the neck too. Maybe you can see a little bit of those hems as well. We've also found traces of red and black pigment, so we know it was originally painted, unlike the Khafra statue we just looked at. Usually men's skin was painted red, and we know that the black was found on the queen's hair. In tombs, the Ka needed good living quarters for eternity, so wealthy families often had interior walls and ceilings of tombs decorated with paintings and reliefs. The decorations could be symbolic or religious, especially in royal tombs, but they could also depict everyday life, especially in elite but not necessarily royal tombs. They could be recounting a monumentous event in the life of the deceased. They might also show the deceased involved in routine activities. This is one of my favorites. It is Ti watching a hippo hunt from the tomb of Ti in Saqqara. It's from about 2450 BCE, and it is from the Old Kingdom still. This scene was found in a large mastaba. Mastabas are still used for non-pharaohs. So this is a mastaba of a government official named Ti. He was a commoner who had achieved great power at the court and had amassed significant wealth, and he had enough to build an elaborate home for his immortal spirit. Here he watches a hippo hunt. Now, how do we know which one Ti is? Again, that use of the hieratic scale. He is the biggest, most important person in the scene. So this scene is going to be about him. He's the star of this scene. So he is watching a hippo hunt. Now, because he is considered elite, he is depicted as very static. He's got one foot in front of the other. Very standard to what we've been looking at. As you can see, the people that he's with, who would be lower class people, they are depicted in all these really cool action poses. This is a relief, and it is painted limestone. It's great because we actually get to see a little bit of the paint that still remains. Now, we have this scene. Ti is standing with these guys on these boats. Okay, and these boats are floating on the river. Now, the river is actually depicted in a really interesting way. Okay, so this is the river right here. It's kind of bluish. It looks kind of blackish to us, but these zigzag lines, if you look really close, with these animals in it. So the river is depicted as if we were looking down on it. But the animals inside of it are depicted as if we're looking from the side. So they're shown in profile. So again, we have that shifting perspective that the Egyptians used so that they can show us the most iconic view of whatever we're looking at. So Ti and the other men are sailing in these shallow boats, and Ti stands very erect. He's rendered in this traditional pose. The other men are more realistic. They are actually performing the activity while he is sort of observing and directing. So they're participating in this hippo hunt. And a hippo hunt was actually an essential task. It wasn't for funsies. Hippos are actually really mean creatures. They're very violent and they will take you out, no problem. So hippos, they had this problem in Egypt where hippos would wander into the fields, and they're very destructive. They would damage the crops. So an official duty of members of the court would be to go out on these hippo hunts and kill these hippos and get rid of the problem, because you don't want your crops damaged. That's not good for anyone. So again, because hippos are so destructive and violent, it was believed that hippos were evil. And it's thought that they were the companions of Seth. Remember, I talked about Seth in the beginning of this lecture. Seth is Osiris's brother, who is also the god of evil. And he disguised himself as hippos. He and his companions disguised themselves as hippos. And so the task of killing hippos is not only helping save our crops, but they're also performing this metaphor, this battle of good versus evil. So it really works on multiple levels. And this is just a great image. You can see at the top all of these other animals and plants here as well. You can also get a good look of how Egyptians would use this red pigment, like red-orange pigment, for the skin of males. The Old Kingdom collapses in about 2181 BCE or 2150 BCE. It's followed by a period of political turmoil. About 2055 BCE, Egypt is reunited and a new capital is built in Thebes. This period from about 2055 or 1975 to about 1650, 1640 BC is known as the Middle Kingdom. And it's marked as a period where pharaohs lost much of their power and authority as provincial governors, and provincial governors start to hold increasing power. The pharaoh's power is limited. His main responsibility is national defense, protecting Egypt from invaders. Pharaohs begin to maintain a standing army to patrol borders, and this is actually how they begin to gain back control later. They're also in charge of planning and constructing large-scale water management projects. Burials also change in the Middle Kingdom. Nobility and high-level officials use rock-cut tombs instead of mastabas. Rock-cut tombs are burial places hollowed out of the faces of cliffs, which I have shown for you up here. The only image we really talk about from the Middle Kingdom is the head of Senusret III. It's made from yellow quartzite. It's about 17 inches tall. Now, Middle Kingdom portraits do not always exhibit the idealized rigidity of earlier periods. This is the head of Senusret III, and it reflects a new subtle style. Now, this is not like sweeping across the board, like all of a sudden in the Middle Kingdom things change completely, but this is some of the art that is seen in the Middle Kingdom. So we know that Senusret was a dominant king, and he's very dynamic. He was a successful general. He led 4 military expeditions into Nubia. He regained a lot of control over the countries, local officials, and nobilities. Yet his portrait seems to reflect not only his achievements, but some of his personality and inner thoughts. He appears wise, kind of lonely and sad and pensive, maybe burdened by responsibilities. We say these things because we can see the wrinkles in his skin. We can see these worry lines through his creased forehead, through his nose. Now, we would never have seen that in the Old Kingdom. This guy has perfectly Botox skin. I mean, he's just like 20-year-old, perfect guy. This guy looks much older. His ears are bigger. Now his chin is damaged, but he may have once have had that beard. He has these wrinkles up here, bags under his eyes, whereas this guy has no sense of any sort of wrinkles or bags or anything like that. So perhaps it's a step towards naturalism. It definitely is a marked distinction between the two periods. Whereas we see our Pharaoh as a god during the Old Kingdom, and during the Middle Kingdom, because they have lost so much power, they probably were seen as less godlike, less important than in the Old Kingdom. At the close of the Middle Kingdom, there's another period of turbulence, and pharaohs lose control of Egypt again. Northern Egypt is invaded, and a new dynasty takes over, and this begins the New Kingdom.